What's up? It's Andrea. Today, the ship encounters a deadly computer virus. The Romulans really are back, and we ask the question, what's the deal with sister ships? Stay tuned to find out.
Welcome to the TNG Podcast, the number one place in the Alpha Quadrant to geek out about all things Star Trek: The Next Generation. I'm your co-host, Shereese.
Hey, I'm your co-host, Andrea. Shereese, we're at the halfway point of season 2 already.
Woo woo!
Can you believe that? I was thinking back to when we were celebrating being through the halfway point of the first season. So it's like, what? How is a whole season basically gone by? This is season 2, episode 11, Contagion, written by Steve Gerber and Beth Woods, directed by Joseph L. Scanlon, and the star date is 42609.1. The synopsis is this. The Enterprise receives a distress signal from its sister ship, the USS Yamato, from within the Romulan neutral zone and travels to rendezvous with them in order to assist with repairs. After the two ships meet, the Yamato suddenly suffers a warp core breach and explodes in front of the horrified bridge crew, leaving no survivors. Shortly afterward, a Romulan warbird, the Hakona, decloaks before the Enterprise and demands their retreat from the neutral zone. Captain Picard informs the Romulans that they will not leave until they have determined why the Yamato was destroyed. What are your initial thoughts on this episode, Shereese?
So my overall thoughts about this is that it's an interesting storyline. I mean, I remember when you heard the name of this episode and you were like, Contagion, great, we've got another virus.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
But this time it's a computer virus. There's a twist. We're not infecting any of the crew members this time, so it's a little bit different. I did think it was kind of interesting, this historical artifact that describes a people from the past, and looking back on history and kind of trying to piece together the stories you've heard versus the evidence that you see and seeing if those two things match. So I think from an intellectual standpoint, I thought that was pretty interesting. And I think the whole episode it felt Trekky. It felt kind of futuristic and cool, and there was technology in it and stuff. How about you? What are your overall thoughts?
So my overall thoughts were, going into it before I watched the episode, I'd mentioned to you oh great, another virus. When are they gonna stop with the viruses? But it didn't feel like a virus episode,
mm-hmm.
right? Where the naked now, you hear the sizzle sound, you see it spreading slowly. This was just a computer glitch that was causing destruction and
mm-hmm.
infected the Enterprise. So I really didn't give it a whole lot of thought going into it, but I really like this episode a lot. I really like it a lot. I love that the Yamato explodes at the beginning, so it sets the stage, so we know what the stakes
what's going to happen. Yeah,
exactly.
That's true. Mm-hmm.
And the fluctuating lights and power, visually is really cool.
Mm-hmm.
And also seeing the first sort of steps, the doors won't open or the replicator is not making tea. It's ooh, it just feels really cool. And the
mm-hmm. idea
also of this ancient civilization that was so much more advanced than what we can understand right now. Mm-hmm. And it's just sort of reworking this wiring to I was just holy crap, this is so good. It's such a good episode.
Totally. It's kind of like the pyramids, right? When you look at the pyramids and you're like, how did they do this without tools, with just with handmade tools and people
yes.
They do this with sticks or whatever. You're just kind of how did this happen without a crane and these big choppers and all this stuff. It's kind of like that. You're looking at the civilization that's way more advanced than anything that they are aware of at all
mm-hmm.
in Starfleet, and you're just first of all, how? Second of all, where'd these people go? If they had all this technology, where are they now?
Yes.
And then kind of piecing together the languages that we do know of originated from this language. So that's
mm-hmm.
even, these people are even older. I mean, that was pretty cool.
Now that you say that too, it really reminds me of the ancient Inca civilization,
mm-hmm.
where they had this incredibly advanced, or even the Mayans were incredibly advanced for their time, incredible use of technology and tools for their time, and then just disappeared. And I believe the Mayans were wiped out because of illness, but the Incans, I don't know, and I'm not an expert on this whatsoever, but I don't think they were. It was just sort of this mysterious vanishing of this entire race of people. And you're but how, but where, but why? It's just super cool. But this episode in and of itself is I think it's a wonderful episode, but it feels very season 2 because you can tell there was some behind the scenes fluctuation because we have this amazing episode right up against an absolute dog shit sandwich episode which is next week. So it's like, it's not consistently good yet. But,
yes, it's not consistent, but this one is definitely a good one. And I agree. It does feel very season 2 where you're like, okay.
Yes. So let's start the episode. So Picard is racing to the neutral zone to help the Yamato. And did you notice, number one, the sister ship, when they bring it on screen, looks identical, of course, to the Enterprise.
Right, because we've seen the Yamato before. A couple times. I think we've seen it twice, but I know for sure we saw it in that episode with the ghost ship when they were trapped.
Silence has lease.
Yeah, when they were trapped in that void with this creepy, all-knowing space monster, and it was like, hey, it's the Enterprise. No, it's not. It's the Yamato, but it looks exactly like the Enterprise, and you're like, oh, that's so clever with like, sets and things. So seeing it again was really fun. I was like, the Yamato again, yay! And then when the screen opens and it's a black male captain, I was like, oh my gosh, there's a black male captain. And then I said, he's probably going to die. And I was right. Before the credits even rolled, he was gone. And I was like, oh, rest in peace.
Oh my gosh. I totally thought the same thing. Number one, I loved that we have a minority captain. And then I typed in my notes, are minorities the new red shirts? Because that's what it feels like. They just instantly die.
Yep.
But did you notice that panel behind Captain Varland? It was like a panel. It was like a smoky black plastic panel with like some sort of schematic keys all over it. And so I was like doing a little research and I was like, what is the deal with sister ships? Because it's a naval tradition to, when you build a ship, you use the same blueprints and you build 2 of the same or more than 2 of the same. And so that's where sister ships came from. But I did a little deep dive and I was like, what? Like, who thought of calling it sister ships? Like, where'd that even come from? So, a sister ship is a ship of the same class and like virtually identical design to another ship. And then those sisters become like differentiated throughout their services. Like you have to make adjustments to one or the other. And so they slowly over time become slightly more different. The 2 most famous sister ships in history are the Titanic and the Britannic, which both sank and both resulted in a lot of loss of lives, which is really sad.
I had no idea. First of all, I didn't know there was a sister ship for the Titanic. Second of all, I didn't know it also sank. Like, man, talk about some sucky marketing. It was all like, these are the unsinkable ships, and it just totally sank.
Yes. So the Titanic sank in 1912, and obviously it was the iceberg situation. The Britannic was sunk in World War I. It was not a naval ship. They both had the designation, I believe, RMS, which was Royal Mail Ship or Royal Mail Steamer. And so they're passenger ships. So it was sunk by another ship like during the war.
Like a torpedo or something?
Yeah, something like that, yes. I don't know exactly. But the death rate and survival rate was flipped from the Titanic. Like most of the people survived and 30 people died, which the Titanic was like the other way around.
Yeah.
Right? Like very few survivors and most people died. So it was very sad, but I was looking into that. And then I had another just a small deep dive about the designations that they're given, because it's the USS Enterprise and the USS Yamato, which means United States ship. So I was like, does that imply that Starfleet is an inherently American organization? Because it's like a united federation of planets. So why wouldn't they have a designation that's, I don't know. But like in England or in British ships, they have HMS, which means His Majesty's or Her Majesty's ship, depending. So like the HMS, whatever, right? It would be like Her Majesty's ship.
Yeah.
So it's like, does that mean though that Starfleet is an American organization? Because that's what it sounds like now.
Well,
me.
I mean, the base of it is in San Francisco. So
I thought that too. I was like, headquarters are in San Francisco. Maybe that's just kind of what they.
It might have been started by America. It's like the space program where there's like it's international, but like it's not like every country's represented.
Yeah.
I guess that's in the space missions at all. It's pretty much all America and all Russia.
But here's another thought though. Yes, Starfleet is headquartered in San Francisco, but the designation of the ship is based off of where it is built, like where the shipyard is, and Utopia is on Mars. So I don't know. I was like, where my brain is pretzeling over ship designations. We're not even in the episode yet.
Interesting. I didn't know Utopia Planitia was on Mars. Now I know that. Okay. Adding that to my bank of knowledge that no one needs, but I'm so glad I have. So yeah, I also, okay, so as we're getting in and before this captain dies, which is like, of course he's gonna die.
R.I.P.
Yeah, the fluctuations and stuff was super cool. Like I feel like we haven't seen that before. We've seen explosions and like the lightning or whatever, but just to see it kind of like shutting down. And then you also see all these crew members behind him like tinkering with things, right? And they've got like little tools and they've got panels open and stuff like that. And you're like, oh, this is interesting. We're like, something's going on here. And Riker makes a suggestion like, hey, do you need us to evacuate all the non-essential personnel in the meantime? Because like if they're non-essential, they're just like taking up space while you actually have this like crisis that you need to solve. And the captain's like, I think that's premature. Like we're going to get this under control. And I was like, dude, if your ship is falling apart and there's a chance to send a few people, this is before I knew for sure he was going to die, but I had an inkling that I knew he was going to die, but I didn't know the whole ship was going to explode. So I was, cause he's black. So, but I was watching and I was just like, dude, like nothing having to do with the ship, right? So as I was watching, I'm like, dude, like let those people go over to the Enterprise just as a precaution, not because you think it's so dire that everyone needs to start hopping in escape pods or anything, but just like if they don't need to be there and the ship is shutting down, anything could shut down. You said life support was shutting down. You said you've lost a lot of crew members, like send those people to safety. And he's like, no, it's fine. And then they blow up. And I was just like,
yeah, that made me sad because I was like, this is not going to go. Although, honestly, by the time he said it's a little premature to be having people evacuate the ship, and then the warp core breach was like 30 seconds. So it's like at most you would have saved 15 people or something. Who knows?
But more than zero. And they actually do have the capacity to do like massive transports to the ship. Like they can do that. Depends, right? If it's dramatically satisfying, they can do it. If it's not, then they can't. Whatever. Then they can only do 13 at a time. But remember, they have like 27 freaking transporter rooms.
That's true.
That each have 6 to 8 transporter pads on them.
That's true.
So they could have transported on they could have rerouted all systems, transported on all of those. I mean, just the non-essentials. So yeah. I feel like that was a mistake, but like nobody knew the ship was going to explode, right? We thought it was just going to kind of become derelict, that it was just going to fall apart and then just not fly, but not that it was that the warp core was going to breach. That was like, yeah. Anyways,
it was not good.
Yeah.
All right. So the ship explodes horribly. I mean, it's a great special effect. Thank God Picard has his wits about him and immediately orders the shields up because that would have been really bad. Mm-hmm. But it is amazing. You see it was an unintended saucer separation. It's like the ship just blowing apart. And then you see the saucer section like being eaten by like flames. And so it was crazy cool. Mm-hmm. But immediately after that, this Romulan ship appears and threatens Picard. And I thought, oh my gosh, we finally see some Romulans for the first time ever.
Yeah, I put the same thing in my notes. Because at the season finale of season 1, the Romulans were like, we're back. That's right. We're back. And then like, they're just not back. But here we have all the way in episode 11, they actually are back. Sort of. They go back away. But yeah, I was like, okay, all right. So they do come back. Okay.
Yeah.
took 11 episodes, but they come back.
Really, at the very end of this episode, it's basically them being like, we're back. Later.
Bye, guys.
Yeah. So I did you notice? Okay, a couple things. There are a few firsts in this episode. When the Romulan commander threatens Picard, he turns to Worf and does the slashing hand mute thing.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this is the first time we've seen the mute button sign. And I was like, yes, it's here. This is starting to feel like the Picard that we know and love.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, it's the first time we see that like hand slashy. That was kind of cool. But we immediately go into the observation lounge, and Geordi has determined that the reason the Yamato was destroyed is because it was a catastrophic mixture of matter and antimatter, which, of course, Shereese, I was like, let me deep dive about matter and antimatter, because isn't that what we're all really here for?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so very quickly. So antimatter sounds very cool, or it sounds really nerdy. And Dan Brown has used antimatter and matter explosions in a bunch of his like books. So it sounds kind of fictiony, but it's actually real. So antimatter is a material that's composed of so-called antiparticles. So what we understand now is that every particle we know of has its antimatter like mirror companion that's like identical to itself, but with an opposite charge. So basically matter and antimatter are sister ships to each other. Like they're identical, but opposite. See what I did there? See what I did there?
Yeah, that was neat.
So we have antiparticles, like for example, like a positron has a positive charge, so its antiparticle is an electron that has like a negative charge.
Mhm.
So they actually do annihilate each other when they meet. So a warp core breach is a real thing that could happen, like hypothetically.
Mhm.
So matter and antimatter cannot exist at close range for more than a small fraction of a second,
Mhm.
because they will annihilate each other and release huge quantities of energy in the form of gamma rays, which are like the deadly radiation. You do not want to be anywhere near that. So yeah, they're totally sister ships to each other. There you go.
That's deep. That's deep. That's a fun little deep dive.
Maybe that was my deepest of dives so far. I don't know.
And we have so much left to go. So many opportunities for some more deep dives. Yeah, so we've got this explosion that Geordi's kind of getting to the bottom of. And on the topic of firsts, this is also when we see Captain Picard's love of archaeology as he starts to go through the deceased captain's logs to be like, okay, maybe there's something in there that can tell us something about something, you know. He's like, the reason why I'm here is because of this lost society and all this different stuff. And you see Picard being like, oh, okay. And this is a theme that continues throughout, like forever for Picard, is that this is one of his passions. So it was like, yay, it's introduced here.
Yes. Do you think, I feel like it's a prerequisite of a starship captain to have a love for archaeology? Do you think maybe that's why Riker never gets his own command post? Because they're like, can you tell us about this ancient civilization? He's like, I don't know. I was too busy chasing tail. And they're like,
yeah.
All right, well, we'll get back to you.
Well, he can tell them about their mating practices. So he's still helpful. He's still helpful either way. But yeah, so going back just a little bit, when the ship blows up, Troy looks like she's about to cry. And I'm like, oh, for the love of Pete. But it was like a very emotional situation. I get it. I'm just like, is she still crying at season 2? And then you have Wesley up there on the bridge. And I was like, wow, this has got to be incredibly traumatic. I think he could use a counselor right now. And I get that Troy is also upset.
She's too busy crying.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I get she's also upset because it's a very upsetting moment. But I'm like, talk about like some trauma. You're just chit-chatting, and then all of a sudden the screen goes like a little pixelated, and then it explodes. And then the pieces, like you said, the saucer that's like flying to the side disintegrates. So it's not even like there's chunks of ship where you can go and find survivors, maybe held in by force fields.
Absolutely.
No, it's like it dissolved and disintegrated everything and everyone. And that's just what I was thinking. I was like, wow, Wesley could probably use a counselor right now. Yeah.
I mean, I agree. However, I will absolutely cut Troy some slack, because if I saw a ship explode and thousands of people die, I would be screaming my head off and not, especially like immediately, your immediate reaction is like horror. And
for sure.
Of course.
But everyone's reaction was just kind of like, was horror. And then they were like, well, moving on, right? They had to get to the next task, including her, because they have military training. They have Starfleet training, and Wesley doesn't. And so that was the thing. And that's what he talked about later when he came to Picard's room. He was just like, how'd you guys all just like go on about your life? Like, I was totally like, what the heck? And so that's why I think he should get some special consideration, is because he doesn't have any military training. He's never been to the academy. He doesn't know how to compartmentalize just yet.
Yeah, it was basically like a bring your son to work day, and then he just stayed at work. Like, he didn't get trained the way you guys did. So
yeah.
Let's maybe just be extra gentle with him.
Or like take him to the side and have a quick chat. I don't know. But anyways, so like a few seconds after this explosion, when they're all reeling and trying to figure out what's going on, or not a few seconds, but a few minutes later, now we get the Romulans showing up. And we're like, okay, like, did the Romulans shoot them out of the sky? Like,
what happened?
What happened? And the Romulans are just kind of like, what are you doing in the neutral zone? Like, we have the right to defend ourselves. Like, if you guys are going to stay in the neutral zone, which I was just like, hold up. Neutral zone means neutral. Nobody owns this space. So how are you coming in here trying to bully people, talking about get out of my neutral zone? That's like literally the opposite of what this means.
Yes, it means anybody can be in here, and it's a buffer between Federation space and Romulan space. It's a buffer zone. Like, anybody can be swimming in and out of there. That's the thing that got me totally, it had me like stumped too, because I was like, why is everybody so uppity about being in the neutral zone? Like, I understand it's a little bit more tense because you're bordering the space where you have like very tense political relations with this other race, but like, you're still in the word says it, it's neutral. It's neutral. It's not your space or my space.
Right.
Why is everybody like, what are you doing in the neutral zone? Why don't you mind your own fucking business? Because we're not in Romulan space or Federation space. I think I would be too sassy to be a starship captain.
Yeah, and then they're always threatening war, right? It's always like, if you stay in the neutral zone, we're going to go to war. And you're like, wait, shouldn't that be if they cross through the neutral zone and get into your, if they actually reach your side? But I guess they're just trying to like be a deterrent. Like, we're going to blow you out of the sky before you get a chance to get over to our side of space. But I don't know. I just was like, wow, they're being really pushy and they don't own their space. And this is weird.
Okay, I have an idea for us. You and I are going to do a fanfic writing, but instead of like writing a story, we're just going to draw up the charter for what the neutral zone rules are. And that's it. It's going to be like, going forward, neutral means neutral. Like, we're just going to do this. We're going to write a whole charter.
Any conflicts must be solved by a dance party.
All right. So Geordi finds out that it was actually a design flaw in the Yamato. And because the Yamato is a sister ship to the Enterprise will have it too, that the magnetic seal between the two like chambers of matter and antimatter failed. And so they rushed together and of course annihilated each other. And I thought, this seems like a bit of a problem. Why do you have these two extremely like volatile compounds right next to each other with like a little teeny piece of like material between, like put one in one part of the Enterprise and then put the antimatter in another part and have them like piped together or something so they can't accidentally meet. Dr. Leah Brahms, you messed up on this one.
I'm not sure how the ship is actually composed, but I do know that there are, as the warp core is like doing its thing, it has all these reactions that I think produces antimatter. So I think that's why it's there. It's like as the warp core functions, it creates antimatter, which then gets like piped into the other parts of the ship and turned into energy. Like that, they recycle the antimatter.
Yeah.
And they use it to power the ship. So I think that's why. I think it's a byproduct because they explain this in Voyager, because there's this episode where this guy is like pumping antimatter into some part of space where like there's not a lot of, where like nobody knows about it. But he's poisoning all this like entire species of people that live there. And he doesn't care because he's just like dumping all this antimatter. And so they reach out to Voyager for help, and Voyager meets with him and says, hey, we have a matter antimatter warp core as well. And here's how it works. And so they talk about how they take that waste and they recycle it and they use it to power their replicators so that they can make food and clothes and everything else on the ship. So they were like, you can use this technology and modify it to your ship so you won't be dumping this toxic antimatter into their space. And the other alien was like, nope. What do I care about these people? So yeah, it was a really good episode actually. But yeah, so that's why I think they're next to each other. I don't think someone like put two tanks and like a straw between the two or something.
I'm sure that'll hold. Put a little scotch tape on it, it'll be fine.
That looks legit. Throw some duct tape. Duct tape fixes everything. I'm surprised they don't have duct tape on the Enterprise actually, but
well, yeah. So you know, as Geordi is getting to work on this like design flaw, did you notice, number one, Picard is in his ready room. He's going through Varlin's old captain's logs to try to find out anything about like the Iconian, this like lost civilization, and the word Romulan. And I love, number one, how thoughtful it is that all of the like personnel logs are uploaded essentially to a cloud. So even if the ship is destroyed, you can still review like what Varland was talking about. Like I love that.
Yeah, I don't think it was uploaded to a cloud. They downloaded the information from the ship when they were talking to the captain because they were trying to help diagnose the ship.
Oh, I see.
And that's how the Romulans also got infected, because they downloaded the contents of the ship as well.
Secretly,
like covertly.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, that makes sense. So as Picard is going through all these logs, Wesley comes in and is like talking to Picard. What did you think about that conversation? Because I feel like it was so contrived. Like Wesley at this time is like 15 or 16 or 17 or whatever, but he's talking to Picard as though he's like 4. He's like, but why did people die? Iconians? What does that mean? Like, it was just so like, I don't know. It just felt very contrived. I feel like the writers were like, you know what? We need to give Will Wheaton like some lines. So we're just going to like make up a conversation. And it was, I think that he was basically representing like the audience. Like, we don't know anything about the Iconians.
Right,
like, we don't, so he was the audience and we were like getting all the information from Picard. But it just felt like so contrived and like shoehorned in. It did not feel organic to me, at least whatsoever.
Well, I like that it was there because like I said, I felt like Wes was probably traumatized and I thought he did need a conversation with someone. And as an audience member, I wanted to see that conversation. But I thought it would make more sense to have that conversation with Troy or Guinan. Would have been an amazing person to talk to about the situation. I'm sure she would have had a lot of wisdom. Picard, not so much. It's like when Wesley needed dating advice and the first place he went was Worf. And you're like, what the? He's just like, is not great with knowing where to go to get advice. But anyways, so I was like, okay, good. Now we're seeing that he was traumatized, but even the way he was traumatized was a bit weird. One thing though, that the thing that caught me about this scene, it didn't feel contrived to me, but I was disappointed because Picard starts this speech about death, right? And he's like, whenever the death of a single person fails to move us, I'm sorry, Captain. And I was like, but what was he gonna say? I was like, I bet that would have been a really good speech.
Yeah, finish your thought.
Yeah, it was just like, because he has these like really good speeches sometimes. And so I was like, oh, he's gonna give this like deep speech about death and about what it feels like to be in the military and how do you like, compartmentalize with still caring. And then it just like got cut off. And I was like, that's kind of like, I mean, I can't hate on the writers too much. They had other stuff to worry about, but that's kind of like when something really good's about to happen in a story, and then they're like, and then they woke up because they just don't know how to like finish that thought in a good way, and they don't want it to suck, so they just like make it go away.
Yes, I totally agree with you on that. Where it's like they probably had something bad happen behind the scenes and had to cut the writing of that speech short. You're like, but I wanted to hear, Picard's little gems of wisdom. Like I
totally want to hear it.
Feel a little bit ripped off. I did. Okay. I had like a weird catch. So Geordi is in engineering and he's doing the thing where he's in the chair and kind of like wheeling around to the different panels, and he's realizing that it wasn't actually a design flaw that led to the Yamato's destruction. But I was like, wait a minute. Look at that chair. It's just like a chair from Staples. Like it's not like pressed up at all to like look futury. They even have Shereese. They didn't even bother taking off the fucking lever that like raises and lowers the chair. It's like, see the wheels and everything.
That's probably one of the writers' chairs. They just snagged it. They were like, buddy,
they're like, here you go.
You wrote the Royale for next week and we're not cool with that. You're done. We can just take this chair from you right now. We're going to repurpose it, put it to better use. Put
that poor man, that poor writer that was fired. It's like, and my chairs? I don't even get to take my chair. No, we're giving it to LeVar. He's going to wheel around dramatically.
Right. Because that's way more efficient than just walking.
And I thought to myself, it really is just one little screw that holds that little lever on. I was like, couldn't you just have taken that off? Seriously? Like, you guys went to like Office Depot and just fucking stuck it in this like amazing set. I was very upset about that. I was like, what? So okay, the Enterprise is heading to this first planet that seems to be like their best guess for like where Iconia should have been or would have been. They're like, this is probably it. Okay, so this probe is launched from some mountainous area and starts coming towards the ship, and Picard immediately contacts LaForge and says, I'm going to help you in your research. We're going to capture one of these probes with a tractor beam and, we can study it. And I love this moment. I didn't know which episode this was in, but I do remember this scene, and I'm so glad to see it. This was it. Geordi immediately freaks out and he's like, no, wait, like there's something bad. But because the ship is now starting to experience like these issues, the comm is down. So he's like running to the bridge, gets into a turbo lift, and then the turbo lift freaks out. And like for LeVar Burton's part, I give so much kudos for this because the physical acting required to be like thrown up against the walls of the turbo lift and then the ceiling and the floor and just getting your ass handed to you. I was like, he must have been like black and blue all over by the time this was done, because I'm sure you can't get it all in one take. I don't know though. Yeah. But like he just absolutely got like whipped around that turbo lift and then gets launched out of it at the bridge. Thankfully it arrived at the bridge and he's like, destroy it. Right. So they destroy this probe. And after seeing your poor main engineer or your chief engineer being like beaten to a smithereen, you would think Picard would be like, emergency, like medical, like get him. He says, welcome to the bridge, Mr. LaForge. What the hell? If I saw somebody getting like their life hand like beaten out of them, I wouldn't be like, good morning, coffee. Like, what the fuck?
It was
Come on.
I mean, I think it was supposed to be funny.
Well, it wasn't. It was insulting is what it was.
My thoughts when he got into the turbo lift, like, I'm glad he was using his head and he was just like, what else can I do? The comms were all down and he just took off. I was like, when he got in the turbo lift, it's the same thing I always say in these emergency situations. Like, when there's a fire, don't take the elevator. Like, you got to take the stairs because the elevator is going to get stuck and you're going to burn to death. And so when he jumped in the turbo lift, I was like, I feel like this is a bad idea when there's like mechanical malfunctions all over the ship.
Yep.
And then it takes off and he's like being thrown around. I was like, oh my gosh, like never take the turbo lift during emergencies.
Yes.
But he had to, because if he took the Jeffries tubes, it would have taken him 2.5 hours to get to the bridge.
Yep.
And that doesn't work either. But like, so in normal ship operations, like if there was not this immediate crisis, like definitely take the Jeffries tubes. But in this case, thankfully, it did shoot him out onto the bridge. So it still went where it was going. It just went a little faster than we all expected. A less smooth ride. But I'm like, at least he got there, and he got there just in time to like destroy the thing.
Yes.
And he, like kind of gotten to the bottom of where this computer virus came from, which was the probe, which was never intended to hurt anything. But because the technology was so incompatible, it was an unfortunate side effect. So yay, Geordi. Geordi saves the day.
Geordi saves the day again. Absolutely. And then he's able to determine that the Iconium probe is trying to merge with the Enterprise computer and rewrite the computer to look like the Iconian code, right?
Yeah, or so to probably communicate.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it looks like, so they are able to figure out like, you know what, the Yamato destroyed itself because it just started malfunctioning because you have these like two completely different language computer codes trying to merge and it's not going to work. And I thought that was a very elegant explanation. And I love that they were able to also very quickly determine that the reason that the Enterprise is being affected is because they downloaded all the corrupted files from the Yamato, right? And it's like, that's why we are being affected, but more slowly, because that corrupt file is kind of slowly working its way through the mainframe of the Enterprise computer, whereas the Yamato just like allowed itself to be probed and then it started falling apart like much
immediately.
Faster. Yeah.
Which is also a relief because you're like, eventually they're going to explode, but they're not going to explode immediately. So it gives them some time to come up with a solution.
Absolutely. And of course, we have to cut to Pulaski complaining about the technology going wrong in sickbay. I didn't feel like there was any point for that.
I was so bothered by that scene, not because it was pointless, which now that you say it, it was, but I was bothered by it because she's just yelling at this other medical officer, just like yelling at him, like screaming at the top of her lungs, like, why is this not working? And why is this not working? Da, 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 da. And I was like, why are you yelling at this guy? First of all, he can't fix it. Does he look like he's engineering to you? No, he's one of your subordinates, like worst boss ever.
Yes.
And then also, I was kind of like, get over yourself, Pulaski. Everyone on this ship is in the same situation.
Yes.
It's not poor you and poor sickbay. Engineering, the nursery, every place, the bridge, the weapons, everything is going haywire. So this is the time for everybody to band together and to be like, we are in a crap situation. Like everything's going down. What can we do to like get through this? That's like the standpoint. It shouldn't be blaming just the first guy who walks past you for stuff that neither of you can control. So I was really irritated by that.
I do very much dislike that. And at this point in the storyline, they've already determined why the ship is going wrong. So screaming about the fact that it's going wrong that's not going to help anything. Yeah. But again, this was kind of a shoehorn. Like we didn't need to see her at all in this episode.
We didn't.
What we really could have used her for was to rush up to the bridge and make sure that Geordi didn't have any like broken bones or anything from his turbo lift ride. Like that's where we could have used you.
But we wouldn't have gotten her for like 2.5 hours because she would have taken the Jeffries tubes.
You know what? This is one instance where maybe not trusting the technology would have worked in her favor.
Yeah, maybe.
She could have gotten in the turbo lift. But
and then
anyway.
Speaking about shoehorn scenes, that we have this scene where like Data and Geordi are in the engineering. I just thought about this as you're talking, where they're in engineering and Geordi's running like side to side, back and forth, and he's pushing all these buttons. And Data is just
Office Depot chair.
Yeah, and Data is just standing there looking over his shoulder. And I thought, this makes no sense. Why wouldn't Data actually be helped? Why is he here? What are you doing, buddy? Like, go back to the bridge.
Yes, I felt so bad. In my notes, I wrote, Geordi's getting his ass handed to him in this episode because he gets electrocuted when the panel, like, misfires or whatever.
Yeah.
And thank God Data is there to, like, pick him up and throw him across the room. And I love that Geordi is just on the floor at this point. He's like, I think I'm just going to stay down. like not even bother getting up. He's like, okay, Data, thank you. Like, Data, Geordi, just stay down. You know, it's like, no, know when you are beaten. Know when you are beaten. Okay.
And now that I think about it, where was the rest of the engineering department? Were they all napping? Why was it only Geordi and Data in the entire...
I'll tell you why. Because Pulaski called them to medical to like yell at them about something they still don't have. They're over in like sick bay getting screamed at by freaking Pulaski. So we're getting this like slightly like this. It's a moment that's like built up for drama, but the Romulan ship appears again and their photon torpedoes are loaded, right? And like they're having all sorts of issues on the Enterprise where like they can't get the shields up, they can't get their phasers, so Riker kind of does this thing that Pulaski did where he's like, well, somebody tell me what the hell we can get. It's like, why are you yelling at the crew? They are all struggling just like you are. We're all trying the best we can. So when he tells Wesley to put the shields up and he's like, shields are down, he's like, well, give me something. It's like, dude, he's trying to.
Yeah.
And it's not his fault. So yelling again. And I think that's a natural reaction. I think it's a natural reaction. We get frustrated and we're like, well, do something, fix something. But it's like, in reality, though, what are you really hoping to accomplish? But I did think it was kind of funny when Wesley goes, sure, sir, the shields are back up. Sir, the shields are back down. and you notice the Romulan warbird like tries to cloak itself, but it can't. And then that's when we start getting clued in like, oh, you guys are affected also. You also cannot control what the heck is going on in your ship. So Picard says, look, I need to go down to the surface of this planet and figure out what the F is going on. And since I'm the one that has the most like archaeological like knowledge of the Iconians, I have to be the one to go. I don't know about you, but I thought that the set was so freaking awesome of the Iconian like control room.
Oh my gosh, it was gorgeous. But before they get down there, I had a little point where I was like, again, it's kind of like the turbolift concern. When there's malfunctions, don't take the turbolift. When there's malfunctions, don't take the transporter. Take a shuttle. I was just like, you're going to, and O'Brien is just like, sir, we don't know if the transporters will even be working when you need to come back. And I was like, and we don't know that they're working now. Like you can start the transport sequence and then they shut down. And now you're just like atoms like floating away in space, half in the ship, half in space. And I was just like, this would again be a time to be like, let's just take a shuttle. Let's just be on the safe side.
even still, the shuttle could have been affected because it's connected.
Totally could have been affected and probably was.
But probably seems safer.
But I just feel like if the shuttle broke down by the time they got to the planet, they could have transported back out. But if they transported in and the transporters break, they've got nothing. They've got like no backup plan. But anyways, turns out I didn't need to worry about that at all. Yeah, so we get to this set, which is sick. Like it's so cool.
Yes, that cool. Like the blue sphere with like the silver like all over it that like looks so much like the probes. It's like, oh my God, this is like amazing. And also whoever did the set design of like the panels that have all, it looks like, like alien writing. It's like, Jesus Christ, this is so freaking cool. So they discover Picard in that shoehorned conversation with Wesley in the ready room says that the Iconians had this like the reason that they're so like built up in myth is because they didn't even use like starships or anything. They were just able to like instantly appear from one place to another. Yeah. Which I'm like, that kind of just sounds like a transporter. So I don't know why it's so like something you guys can't understand at this point.
Well, because they were distant planets. And the transporter can't do that. The transporter can only go in a certain range, right? Because the ship has to get really close to a planet before it can transport off the surface.
You're right.
So for them to just be like go into a different system in like the blink of an eye with no ship is pretty crazy.
That is really cool. So we in this control room, we see how that was possible. They had the technology to create gateways, and it's just like you walk through a doorway and instead of going across the room, you end up like across the galaxy on a planet, which is like, oh my God. Like
this is
also
the coolest transporter technology I've ever seen in my life.
Yes.
I was like, oh my gosh.
And the visual effect also that like you see it's just like this 2-dimensional doorway, like there's no depth to it. It's so freaking cool. So Data becomes like he gets electrocuted. So electrocution is a very big theme in this episode apparently. And he is now being like rewritten in the Iconian program. And so it's like of course like messing with Data and like it's basically breaking him down. So he has to very like haltingly describe the sequence of codes that need to be input in order to destroy this station so that more ships don't, become like the Yamato.
Yeah.
And really
the reason why Picard wanted to destroy it was so the Romulans didn't get their hands on it.
Yes.
Because they said this is the most powerful weapon. You know, that was the whole reason why the other captain of the Yamato was there and risked going into the neutral zone and risked war, because he knew there was this Iconian weapon and he didn't want the Romulans to get their hands on it and destroy Starfleet. So when they get there, they go, oh, this is the quote unquote weapon. It's actually a transporter, but it can transport people anywhere at any time with no warning. So that's what makes it a valid thing to be used as a weapon by people with like bad intentions. So in war, like how helpful would that be if you could just send a whole army straight to Starfleet headquarters in the blink of an eye? There's no warning, there's no defense against it. And so then he was like, okay, we have to destroy this, even though this is incredible technology and its history and everything else. Like the risk side of it is so high that it has to be destroyed, which is like true and super sad.
Yeah, it is really sad. Like you've reached this like amazing pinnacle of technological innovation, so much so that if it fell in the wrong hands, it's too dangerous. And that is like beautiful and cool and sad at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, it's like destroying the pyramids, because if something happens, they'll somehow get in the wrong hands or whatever, and you have to destroy them, and you're just like, oh.
Yeah, it's a little gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
So, you know, Worf is able to pick up data and use the gate, because the gate also shows like inside the Romulan warbird, inside the Enterprise, and then all these like distant planets. So as much as Worf is like, we don't know if those are really real gates, if it does that really lead to like where it shows. And Picard is like, look, we don't really have we don't have a choice. Data needs to be taken care of immediately, and I need to destroy this thing as fast as I can, because the Romulan warbird is hovering like just above the atmosphere and could get down here at any second. So Worf carries data into the bridge of the Enterprise, which is so cool too. He just like appears.
Yeah, so cool.
Super cool. So it looks like Data dies, right? They can't figure out how to like rewrite the programming and get the like virus out. He totally flatlines, which I thought was funny, because flatline shows like heartbeat. So
but
like,
he does have a heartbeat.
Does he?
He does. He has a heartbeat. He has like hair follicles that grow through his pores on his skin.
I guess that's
he
true.
Has like he can regulate the heartbeat, and he can regulate how much of his hair grows, and he can regulate all those things like by conscious choice. But he has all of those things to mimic being a human.
Thank you, Dr. Shereese. I did not know that he had all those parts. So I guess that makes sense. That makes sense. So he flatlined, but then basically like rebooted. And that's when Geordi posits that the same could be done with the Enterprise. If we just shut the whole thing down and reboot, and you kind of do like a hard reset, like a factory default reset, you can get the Enterprise back up and running. And they do it just in time to like save the Enterprise. And then Picard is like pushing all his buttons. He sets the station to like self-destruct and cannot get to the Enterprise in time. So he runs through the gate into the Romulan ship, which is lucky, because if he ended up like across a star system, he'd just die there. They'd never be able to find him. So it's like perfect. Yep. He ended up right in a place where O'Brien could find his pattern.
Yeah, he ended up like a couple 100 feet away.
Yeah.
not like multiple systems away with only his comm badge, which doesn't work that far away apparently.
Yes.
Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Dramatic effect.
Yeah. And we see that the Romulan ship is about to self-destruct because, again, it's suffering the same fate as the Yamato, which for me, I'm like, that's what you get for like covertly stealing all this information.
Right.
That's what you get. But O'Brien gets him out of there in time. So they end up sending like their instructions to the Romulans to be like, here's how, hold down the power button and the green button for 5 seconds together, and then it'll reboot your entire ship and you guys will be fine. And then they were just sort of on their way. But this episode was so freaking cool. Like it had so many different like parts to it.
Yeah. No, it was great. And the Romulans being here added just the right amount of threat for why they needed to destroy this cool technology. Because besides that, there was really what was their purpose? But like that was, and to also see like, their photons are armed. Oh no, our shields are down. Like they added like the right amount of drama to not totally take away from the storyline, but to like give good like motivation. So I thought that was really nice.
That's true. Because if a different alien species had been there, it wouldn't have been such a threat. Like if the Ferengi had been there, they'd have been like, you guys don't even know what you have on your hands.
Right,
so
right.
Like,
no one would care.
Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like in season 1, we had this challenge where there would be these parallel storylines in the episode that like really compete and they don't really match. They don't mesh together. And you're like, it's like 2 episodes in one and neither one's very good and they're both going at the same time. And I feel like that's not this. This is very cohesive. Yeah, and one of the things I loved is when they were kind of poking around the Iconians transporter room, and they're talking about Worf was talking about like, yes, they were warriors, of course, because that's how he sees everything, and he's like, they use this as a weapon to go and conquer all these places,
Yes.
and then and then Data's like, well, I don't see any evidence anywhere that this was a war room or that they did campaigns, because he's looking around, he's like, from what I'm seeing, from what I'm reading, it's just like they were just kind of explorers. And then
that was
Picard,
essentially their transporter room. The control room was like a transporter room for them.
Yeah. And then Picard says, well, history is often written by the victors. So we're taking the history based on all the people who bombed the crap out of this planet to get that, for these people to be destroyed. So they're the ones who wrote the history that these were terrible, evil, and they were popping up on other planets and taking over everything.
Yep.
But we don't even know if that's true. And then he's like, and then that's also how like this language got disseminated far across the galaxy, because as they're bombing everything ahead, the Iconians just kind of walked through this door and just went to some other place and could live in peace. So I thought that was really interesting, because it's like at the end of the day, we still don't know about the Iconians. We still don't know if they were conquerors, explorers, a little mix of both, like none of that, which is so fascinating.
Well, and I thought too that one of the things that Picard touched on when he was talking about history is invariably written by the victors is that we fear what we do not understand. Like that is just a natural survival mechanism. If we don't understand it, we fear it. And then we start to justify our own like fear-based reactions toward that new and, new thing that we will say like, it was dangerous, I had to kill it, or it would have killed me. And really it's like a butterfly. And you're like, okay, well, in your mind, that was justified. But really, that's the only story we're ever going to get to hear is like the Iconians were these like horrible warriors that had to be destroyed. It's like, they might've just been like peaceful.
They might have been anything.
And they could have been anything. But now we'll never know, because you rewrote the story to justify like your own actions, which is that. I mean, I think that is something that like our history has shown throughout the ages that that's what we do. And we still, like, as much as our technology has advanced quickly over the last couple hundred years, we still very much fear what we don't understand. And our first instinct is to like be violent towards it, which is really sad. That's a really sad instinct.
Yep. Agreed.
Anyway, on that wonderful note, we just went into this really deep episode, and next week we are going into like the most shallow, stupid episode ever. So if you're looking for a deep reading, maybe this is the one.
Yeah, we might recommend skipping the next episode if you're watching along with us. Like as we watch episode by episode, maybe skip the next one. Do you want to let them know what the next one is?
Yes. Next week we are talking season 2, episode 12, entitled The Royale. Thanks so much for listening and nerding out. And we love having every single person listen to this, and we'll see you next week.
Bye. Thanks for geeking out with us. Be sure to join the crew at thetngpodcast.com to be the first to know when we do our live shows or host events exclusively for our members. We'll see you next time.